Hello there. Good afternoon. I'm Will Harris, the Flame Family Product Manager, and I'm here with my colleague Doug Walker, our Autodesk color scientist. And we want to take you through what we call a vision presentation about really our vision in concern to color management, grading, and HDR. We're going to take a journey through different disciplines of what we think is important today and for the future, looking at grading and really how it relates to VFX as well as color management and this new technology of HDR, high dynamic range. So with that, Doug, let's take it away.
Okay, thank you, Will. So we'll start with HDR. We are very much a believer in this idea that the future of cinema and television should include not only more pixels, but better pixels. And by better, we mean wider color gamut and wider dynamic range. This will finally remove the bottleneck that has existed in the displays. Right now with the high quality digital cinema camera or film, you're capturing a lot more information than you can display. But with the high dynamic range displays that are being developed, it will be possible to see virtually everything that the camera has captured.
I'd like to point out that that this really is a sort of like a new art form, really. It's more detailed, can be seen, can be worked with, can be used dynamically. It's not all about brightness, it's not all about shadows, it's essentially about the subtlety and the opportunity for things looking better fidelity. But that said, I think to your next point.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so we like to joke that if the audience needs sunglasses, you're not mastering it correctly, because right. HDR is not really about brightness. Sometimes we talk about the HDR displays coming out, is it 1,000 nits, is it 2,000 nits? But it's not really entirely about the brightness. Right. And I'd like to dive into that a little bit more here. And what we're looking at here are the system tone scales for standard dynamic range. The system tone scale shows you how light in the scene on the horizontal axis translates into light on the display in the vertical axis. And what I'm showing here are the ACES tone scales for cinema and television. These are quite similar. The television is about one stop brighter than cinema and slightly lower contrast, but basically very similar. And now if we overlay the HDR tone scales for 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000 nit video, you can see that in the highlights, we're preserving more contrast, and also in the shadows, we're preserving more contrast. But the reproduction of the midtones, the nominal reproduction, is unchanged. Now, with HDR, there's more freedom for the colorist to make light scenes lighter and dark scenes darker, but on average, it's not really about making things brighter. It's about making things more realistic by taking advantage of greater range in the displays.
So like the scene realism of the difference between indoor lighting and the sun could be represented here, as could extra detail in dark areas of a scene.
Exactly. Now, this is, of course, important in grading, but it's also important in visual effects. And so you can imagine if you're a VFX artist who's adding laser blast or working on a lightsaber, it's so important to be able to see what that would look like on an HDR display. And in this next scene, we've got on the left a standard dynamic range reproduction, and on the right, we're trying to simulate what you might see on an HDR display. And in the shadows, you're seeing more detail. In the highlights, you're seeing more detail and also more color, because there's a lot of colors that get desaturated to white on a standard dynamic range display that retain their color in high dynamic range. And so it's so important for the visual effects applications to also provide you the ability to monitor in high dynamic range. And we're over in the pod, we're showing Flame and Lustre, sending 12-bit HDR PQ signals to a Dolby Maui monitor.
I think it's worth mentioning that this quality has been in post-production and somewhat in acquisition and post-production through things like OpenEXR, floating point technology for a while, but with HDR, more of that detail is making its way all the way to the consumer.
Exactly, yes. So with HDR, we now have more deliverable formats that we need to master to, and as you know, over the past few years, we're seeing more and more source formats from all the digital cinema cameras. And so we have this proliferation of color spaces that we need to deal with. And in order to deal with them successfully, it requires a combination of different aspects of color. Of course, there's the creative color grading aspect, but there's also the technical or color management tools that are important in order to really be able to work effectively with all these different color spaces. And so, by way of example, if you're starting with like a single color space like log C and you're making a single deliverable like standard dynamic range video, you can get by with just doing color grading. In other words, you don't need color management, just grade it until it looks good. But as you start adding, let's say, more deliverables that you need to produce, it starts to get less and less efficient because you wind up, having to almost regrade from scratch for the different deliverables. So more color management is, a very nice way of addressing this problem. And at Autodesk, we are big supporters of the Academy's ACES initiative to develop a set of color management standards for motion picture and television. And in the ACES system, there are a set of input transforms that provide a way of taking your different color spaces from a wide variety of different digital cinema cameras, converting them all to a common working space, and output transforms that can be used to then convert to different deliverable formats. And so normally you would start out by doing a master grade on your hero deliverable. And then by simply applying the ACES output transforms for the other deliverables, right away you get something that looks good. And it typically requires just a trim pass to make the final deliverable. And that's true for not only standard range, but also high dynamic range. The ACES system provides color transforms for the high dynamic range deliverables as well. And as you know, for HDR video, the new color space that we have is TBD space.
I think, by the way, T apostrophe, that's actually an inside color science joke, isn't it, Doug?
Well, T prime, B prime, D prime is the digital cinema version of that, yes. Anyway, color science humor.
Yeah.
Somewhere there's a color scientist online laughing, I hope, at that. But so the standards for HDR are still evolving, and we're tracking those closely. The other nice byproduct of the ACES system is it gives you a graded ACES master that's a wide color gamut, high dynamic range, floating point master that you can put in the vault, and it will let you take advantage of, as the displays continue to evolve, it will give you a very nice future-proof master to work with in the future. So one of the questions that we find ourselves asking more and more as we're developing the tools is, how can we help artists focus on the art and not the technology? In other words, how can we try to make some of these technical things like color management easier to use?
I think we're going to show you. All right? Go ahead. Absolutely.
So in the 2017 release that we're debuting at the show, we've introduced some first steps along this road of trying to simplify color management, focusing on the input side. And so we've introduced the ability to define rules to map inputs to color spaces, and some technology to do automatic transformation into a common working space. And Will is going to give you a demo of that right now.
Yeah, we just wanted to give you an idea of of life without rules and life with rules in terms of color space management here on the Flame. If you guys could switch us over. So really what we have here is some sources. This is some red log material, so red interpreted as log. Here's some Flame elements that are sRGB or Rec 709. And the problem is that you can't make them look correct either way. Your fire's in the wrong color space if your person is here in the right color space, or vice versa, right? So that's a challenge. Same thing if you have CG OpenEXRs with a Rec 709 backplate. You can have it look right one way, so they have the turkey look correct but not the backplate, and I think you get the idea. This is challenging, especially with very disparate color spaces. So really what this rules system does, and it's sitting there active right now, with different rules. Log, essentially DPX with log in the name will be interpreted as log. DPX otherwise will be sRGB. ARIs, EXRs with ARI in the name pattern, and so on. Otherwise, seen linear.
This is something that you would customize based on your convention and workflow.
And then, of course, what's happening is that when I turn this on, you then see that from the file or the rules, I'm able to pick individually or use my rules and then pick a working color space. That's going to essentially be like, for the project or for this shot, the working color space. And by doing that, when I then, over here, you can start to see that by just picking one viewer here, I now have my scene correct within itself. So they're now in the same working color space. And then looking down here at this more extreme example, you can see how, whilst I might still continue with my work here, this is now a color managed workflow. All right, back to you.
Great, thanks, Will. So if we can go back to the slides. So, as the projects that you're finishing get more complex, you might find yourself with a lot of different color spaces. So I'm showing here a timeline with log.c sources. You might have a LUT as a gap effect that's converting to video space. You might have temporary shots in video space, overlays that have to be comped, that happen to be in sRGB, and you might have some batch effects in scene linear. And so if the application was color space aware and knew the color space of the different pieces of media, it could help simplify the experience of working in the application. So one example of this is the way algorithms respond to color. So certain algorithms like compositing make assumptions that the source materials are in scene linear space. Other algorithms like color correction work better on video or logarithmic color spaces. And so if the application knows what color space a certain piece of media is in, it can tailor the response of the tool to work best in that color space. So for example, a color corrector node could, in video mode, have the ranges and the feel of the knobs tailored to that color space. And if it's in scene linear mode, it could change the response of the knobs and the ranges to work better with scene linear. So we've been talking about Flame, and I'd like to transition now to Lustre. At Autodesk, we're very fortunate to be working with some really amazing artists, and many of the most visually stunning movies that have come out over recent years have been color graded in Autodesk Lustre. I don't know if you saw the presentation this morning that Will gave with Steve Scott from Technicolor, but it was just an amazing example of the incredible artistry that goes on behind the scenes, and that is, in some sense invisible, but just makes such a contribution to the final result.
Yes, that presentation will be available in the area, but I think it's worth pointing out that the last 4 years of Academy Award winners for cinematography have been graded in Lustre. 3 of them by Steve Scott, 1 by Dave Cole, another great customer of ours, and Flame is involved too. But the headline news here, I think, is that Lustre did the grading.
Exactly, and
cool.
and it's a real privilege to be able to work with these customers, and we try to have a really collaborative relationship. And one of the things that we heard, as our customers are dealing with 4K deliveries, is the need for more performance. And so last fall in our 2016 Extension 2 release, we did some refactoring of Luster's foundation, and so now Lustre is rendering on the GPU in 32-bit floating point. We're getting a 4x faster performance rendering complex grades, debayering 4 times faster, and we have our GPU shot reactor technology, which allows us to leverage multiple GPUs on multiple workstations.
Right.
Another thing that we've been hearing as we talk with our customers is that the expectations of what it would be nice to do in the grading suite are increasing. The grading suite is an interesting place where the key decision makers come together, they see their final product in the grading theater, and at that point, especially if there are a lot of complex elements coming together, it's a great opportunity to be able to make corrections, to tie things together better.
Yep.
And so
I
see that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I also think that it's becoming harder and harder to separate the disciplines and separate the art. In other words, it would be very hard to imagine color grading this without the fire in place, this image here. Just like you're nuancing how the fire looks, impacts the amount of reflection that you want, and impacts the shadows that you want. And it's hard to say this is grading and this is VFX in some cases. So I think it's a vision that we have that we're going to show you some progress in this area, but it's a vision for the industry, I think.
Exactly, a vision of convergence of grading and visual effects, and what could be done by bringing these tool sets together.
Right. All right. So you want to see some of it live? Let's check it out. So over here, if we could just take me to the 2-up view for a moment. I want to show you that I'm here in the Flame and Lustre running together on one workstation. And really what I want to do is just give you an illustration of what we call our connected color workflow. So let's say that you're doing your grading, but you get to the point where you want to do something that really isn't grading anymore, whether it's a lens flare or a paint fix or something creative, compositing, sky replacement. I'm going to show you very simply how you can jump over to the batch environment. You can see my shot here. And by just a click of a button here, I'm now arriving in Flame with a couple of interesting things. I've got my source image. There it is. And I have my Lustre grade. You could think of it a little like a sort of a mega LUT, but it is certainly fully formed with the shape system, with all of the color of Lustre there. And I might simply want to do something as simple as pull out, and audition a couple of little effects here, perhaps. Let me just give you an idea. You might do, you might be blooming. You might be going nuts with some of our Stingray technology in Flame. You might be stylizing. You might be doing a painterly effect, let's say on the car or on part of the car. And of course, there's a whole bunch of options for different looks and feels, a comic book look, and so on, to get really interesting kind of visual styles going there. You can see that that's kind of a softening effect there. You might be doing interesting kind of creative you might want to create interesting sort of ripples in space there. Let me get that to go. Hold on a sec. Does. Or you might want something like a lens flare, and you have the whole tool set of Flame actually available to you.
Right, so this is not just plugins, right? We're taking advantage of over 20 years of development in Flame's compositing environment. So it's anything that you can do in Flame's batch procedural compositing environment, you can now do during a grading session in Lustre.
Yeah, what I was going to do, I like the look of this lens flare, Doug, so I'm going to send it back. And what's happening is it's smart enough to say, okay, well, I can't show all the compositing pieces of Flame in Lustre, but I can keep my grade live on top of the work that you did. So now I'm back here in Lustre. You can see that I'm now able to continue to work with my color adjustments on top of my lens flare effect in this case. A slightly more sophisticated example could be, as you can imagine, there's a lot more you can do in Flame. So perhaps you wanted to do something like a full sky replacement. And just to give you an idea, the granularity that you could go to here, when you start doing some deeper effects, you could take your luster here and explode it out into its component pieces.
So this is separating out the individual components of the luster grading pipeline,
yep,
so that you can insert an effect precisely where you want.
Yes, so in this case I have a complete set of functionality that I want to basically do like a complete background replacement, but I want I'm going to need the grade of my work up to a point at least to do this. This is like a camera track that I want to see here. So let's just have a look at that real quick. So sky replacements, beauty work, whatever it is you're doing. This case we want to swap out our environment to be out in the English countryside instead of under a LA freeway. So and that's going to go back there, but leaving this part of my luster grade live.
So you're able to use Flame's 3D tracker to analyze, solve for a camera,
yep,
and insert a background.
Yes, and I think perhaps you can see that it's quite a tight integration. It's easy for an artist to use. They can still continue to adjust whatever we leave available to them. So in this case, the output adjustments here are still available on the overall result. So you can choose how you set up your pipeline. We'll keep as much of it live for you as we can. All right, so that's that. Coming on back to you, Doug.
Okay. So one of the things that I wanted to draw to your attention is that we now have the luster grading engine that has been used on all of these amazing movies.
Right.
Now running in Flame. So we're rendering luster grades on the GPU in Flame. And this opens the door for a lot of interesting possibilities going forward. So let's just look at sort of the history of the development of the integration between Flame and luster. So in past releases, we supported a workflow where you could use the great conform tools in Flame to conform a timeline, send that to luster as metadata. Grading would be done. Luster would send back rendered files to Flame. Additional finishing work could be done. Titles could be added, etc. And then the final delivery from Flame. Now, at the show, we in this release, we're introducing our connected color workflow. And this allows a flare to be running on the same workstation as luster and allows the grading artist to send a grade for a shot as metadata to flare, do a visual effect, and flare renders back essentially a cache for luster so that it can continue grading on top of the effect.
So that's what we just saw.
Exactly. And what we think would be quite interesting going forward is for luster to be able to send back, rather than rendering files back, to send back a grade for the entire timeline so that the decision making could be kept soft.
Right.
The Flame artist could insert effects, the grade could be tweaked if needed, and the whole process could basically allow a deferred decision-making process.
We like deferred decision-making in this industry.
Exactly.
If you hadn't noticed, yeah. It's something that that could lead us towards a much greater flexibility. These luster nodes are transportable. They can be given to other flames and so on. I think you can start to see the possibilities here. But so yeah, I think that's represents some of our vision. And I guess we just want to wrap up there with a little bit more. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in summary, HDR is something that we see as an extremely important trend, and we plan to continue building on our HDR functionality and supporting the different standards for HDR as they emerge. In color management, our focus is around making the applications more color space aware so that they can do some of the heavy lifting around the complexity of color management and make working with color easier for artists. And in color grading, we're giving a lot of thought to how we can take this amazing tech that we have in both Flame and Lustre and combine it in interesting and creative ways to allow for interesting new workflow possibilities that would allow for keeping the decision-making process soft through the entire workflow.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to reinforce the point that we here at Autodesk think it's important, this combination of the need for color management with all the digital sources out there, all the new deliverables out there, the vision towards the connectivity between grading and VFX for overall aesthetic, overall look, and of course HDR, the cherry on the top for our work, making it at a better quality, a better fidelity to our audience. And that's our vision.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.